Okay. So Gary, it's all yours.
Good afternoon. Our speaker today shouldn't be any stranger. It's Jeff Moore, and he's going to be talking about agaves, all of the natural ones, plus some hybrids and other things. The neat thing about his talks is he will a lot of times give us hints on whether they're good landscaping potential or not. So, and I think he's written a new book. So I'll let Jeff tell us about that one.
Thank you, Gary. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to share screen and call up my presentation. We're going to start with the, you guys see the cover of the book there?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for having me. I wish I could be there in person again, although I know you guys are in search of a new meeting hall, it sounds like. This book here, Agaves, I wasn't planning on doing this book. After my last book on the sharp succulents, I started working on a Dudleya book, but that got backburnered because my friend Jeremy Spath, who I'm sure some of you know, is a real agave expert, and he's been on Instagram and other places. Was posting these beautiful pictures of agaves, mostly in habitat. I was trying to encourage him to to do an agave book, and he wanted to, but he's got 3 young kids and a business to run, and it was never going to get off the ground. So he asked me if I'd help him do it. So we ended up doing this, my first joint project, and I'm really happy with how the book came out. At the end, it's not here yet. As we speak, I have an advanced copy. I can show you right here. This is it, big, thick, 350 page book. It's came out really good. I have advanced copies, but the books themselves right now are floating around off the port of Los Angeles, off of Long Beach, one of that big line of container ships out there. So we're hoping we have the books by the end of this month or early next month. This is a cover shot. This is Agave avatifolia. Jeremy took this in habitat. We'll talk more about this one in a little bit. We went back and forth on which shot to use for the cover. This one is not particularly bright, colorful shot, but we love the composition and layout of it. So this book is about agaves, both in habitat and in cultivation. My personal books have always been cultivation oriented, about how we grow them here in California, and that is in here too, but we have much more in the way of habitat in this book than I'm used to doing, which I love because the photos are beautiful. The book starts off pretty clean. We just have some nice big full-page pictures of some wonderful plants. That's an exceptional agave shawii in habitat on the left, and on the right is Brian Kimball's. It's almost an iconic photo he took of Agave Montana in habitat coloring up. This is we're going to get into the specific species in a little bit. I'm just showing you some overall photos right here. We're pretty much following the book. 95% of what I'm showing you here, these images are in the book, plus a lot more. This is the Mission Santa Barbara. It looks a little bit like Mexico, but this shows you how agaves are really becoming, and I'm sure you're aware, is so popular in landscaping now. They're such statement plants. This is a blue glow in front and Horta behind that, and Vilmariniana and Franzosini. This is up by Lake Cachuma on the backside of Santa Barbara. There's a little private estate where this very wealthy lady has made a fantastic succulent garden. It's part of her agave walk along the perimeter. That's Agave Franzosini, and the blue ones, the green ones look like Agave Impressa. It's a variegated Salmiana, the small one.
Mm. Wow.
And we wanted to be a little bit traditional. We talked a little bit about the history of the agaves, about the early descriptions and the medicinal uses, and how the Mesoamericans, how they used agaves. So we covered that a little bit, but this is primarily an ornamental enthusiast book. So we covered that, but not in a lot of detail. Another thing that we couldn't get around, you have to talk about tequila, because 90% of the people, you say the word agave, and the first thing and the only thing they think about is tequila. So we do address tequila. We talk about how it's produced, the difference between tequila and mezcal, and which agaves make which is up to debate. I learned that technically tequila is mezcal, but tequila purists will tell you otherwise. There's going to be quite a bit of arguments about that. But the emphasis here again is that this is a book about agaves as ornamental plants. And they grow from the deserts to the mountains, right down to the beach. This is Agave titanota, a form of titanota growing right at the beach in Encinitas. This photo accompanies this little spread here. This is something that's kind of unique. This gentleman, Gary Linden, down in Oceanside, and there's other people up in Santa Barbara and elsewhere that have found that the dried agave stalks are basically like balsa wood. It's so light that they've been able to make surfboards out of dried out agave inflorescence as the material, and they glass over that. So that's just another interesting use for the plant. And agaves are really popular as an art form too. So we do have a couple of pages just showing how people have represented agaves in various artistic modes. And the way I've always done my bibliography is right there in the middle of the book. I want to show people the other books that have been produced about agaves over the years. We're just hoping ours is the next in line after these wonderful books. The one in the middle there, that's Gentry's. That's pretty much been the Bible of agave files for 40 or 50 years. It's been 40 years anyways. It's a great book, big thick book, but you know, he lacked the color photos we can do nowadays, and it's pretty technical. But and also so much has changed in the last 40 years too. Greg Starr's Agaves, bottom left, that's one of my favorite books. He's a very enthusiastic guy and beautiful photographs. Pilbeam's book is great too. Not a lot of text, but beautiful photos. And Irish but the other two are wonderful too. Chasing Centuries is primarily about the Southwest agaves and the indigenous people and how they used them, but it's also very well written. So we're hoping ours will be the next book in this line for the next handful of years. In the introduction, also, we talk about, for people that are new to this, how to tell the difference between agaves and other plants. So, you know, if you're a novice, agaves and aloes are superficially look kind of similar. They used to call agaves the New World aloes, but they're obviously different plants. So we talk a little bit about differentiating. Furcreas on the right, the variegated Furcrea, you know, those look a lot like agaves. And if you like agaves, you obviously like Furcreas. Surprisingly, you can't do any intergeneric crosses. As close as they look, as far as we know, they haven't been able to cross these yet, but they make a very similar statement in the landscape. And I'd make a case that you know, the variegation cuts across all plants, all types of plants and succulents, but in the succulent realm, I think the variegation in agaves is probably more striking than in any other group of plants. There is such a variety of variegation, striated forms, medial-picked to mid-striped forms. So we have a little section in the front just showing 6 or 8 pages of variegated agaves, but throughout the book, we show, when we can, we show example of variegation with these species. And one on the top left is a mystery one. I don't know if that's a form of Okahui or Lophantha. I took that picture at a customer's backyard, a garden, about 25 years ago on film, on slide film. And I went back a few years ago to see if that plant was still there, but it bloomed out and it's gone. And he didn't even know what it was, and I've never seen it since. If anyone out there finds one of these, please let me know.
It looks like it's getting ready to bloom right there.
I kind of did, I know. So it probably just disappeared shortly after I took that photo. Another thing about agaves is there could be some wonderful color with them. I mean, most of them are blues and greens with all kinds of imprinting too, but some of them will stress into red at times, either at flowering, blooming time, or if they're really dry, or if they went through some damage. So that one in the back, that's an Agave impressa, not normally red, but it's red here for some kind of a stress reason. And you'll see that in the next couple of photos too. Both of these are either flowering or just flowered or are going to flower. So it's just like the way leaves turn. There's a chemical terminology of what's going on here, which I can't think of at the moment. It's in the book. But they kind of behave similarly. They reorganize what's happening with their chlorophyll right during blooming inflorescence time, because they put so much energy into the flower that some agaves will radically change color at the end of their life. Shaw-I will do this on the left. That's Boba cornuta. On the right, that's Montana, which can at times show really brilliant coloring at the end of its life. As you guys probably know, we'll get to this in a minute. Agaves have a terminal lifespan. They're monocarpic. They bloom once at the end of their life, which most 99% of them do. And that's usually anywhere from 7 to more likely 15, 20, 25 years before they bloom out. And boy, the beauty in agaves is both in the pulled back view and the pulled in view. If you get in close, some of these plants, this is called imprinting, where the developing spines make these wonderful imprints on the softer tissue as they develop, and as they separate, you get this beautiful imprinting patterns. And it's one of my compulsions now. Like when I did my aloe and agave book, aloe oriented 10 years ago, I couldn't stop taking pictures of aloe flowers. of late, I can't stop taking pictures, up close pictures of agave imprinting. It's such a wonderful, wonderful phenomenon that happens. And the teeth too. There's such crazy teeth on some agaves. On the left, that's agave horrida, which is one of our favorites. On the right is agave parasana. And look at those red teeth and that crazy imprinting that shows on the plant. I mean, certain individuals show it more than others do. We have a little section on agaves in the landscape. And I think you folks could relate to this. This is a collector's garden. If you wouldn't design a garden like this, it probably wouldn't pass muster with most architectural designers. But this is obviously an enthusiast garden. Jeremy, my co-author, you'll see him in a little bit. This is a guy we both knew, and he told Jeremy that he wanted to rip out his lawn and put in an agave-centric garden. And Jeremy was so happy, he just fell to his knees with anticipation. So they did the boulders and the mounds and agaves and a few aloes and a few cacti and other things too. Just a fun place to visit when you're down in San Diego proper.
Mm-hmm. Looks great.
I'm sure you know Kelly Griffin. This was his front yard. It was about 5 years ago. It's evolved since then. The avatifolia in the front corner has since bloomed and disappeared. But this is a nice example of a busy garden, but it's very pleasing to the eye. A lot of beautiful blue agaves in this one. They're spaced far enough apart that it's not, at this stage of their life anyways, it's not too crazy. You can see the gravel top dressing in between. Now, truthfully, now it's even more crowded. It looks a little more like my front yard. It's, you guys know how it goes. You sort of overplant because you can't help yourself. On the left is, so Jeremy's path, he's got a fairly new nursery. It's a home nursery out in inland Escondido. It's called Hidden Agave Ranch. It's by appointment. You need to contact him if you're coming down that way. But he has built this beautiful little rockery in the back of his house on these hills and stuffed every corner with little miniature and mid-sized agaves and other various plants, dudleyas and some perennials. And that's a beautifully done example of an enthusiast agave garden on the left. Some of those are going to get big down the road. And the photo on the right is one of his hybrids. We'll get to this in a little bit, but he's been doing a lot of new hybrids. Some of them don't even have names yet, but there's going to be a lot of new plants coming down the pike pretty soon. Another great example of imprinting on this one. I think that's like Parasana crossed with Isthmensis or something like that. And this is, again, Agave avatifolia, one of our favorites. That's the whale's tongue agave, fairly new to cultivation. These appeared, I don't know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They made a pretty rapid move in introduction and spread into the landscape industry because they're very durable. You can grow these, this is in San Francisco here. Apparently you can grow these in Arizona too. They're really tough plants. They do bloom for a big agave. They're big, but they're not tall. They only get about maybe 3 feet tall, but they can be 5 to 6 feet wide. They bloom at about more like 10 years, which is kind of early for a large agave, but it's a spectacular inflorescence too. It's a great landscape plant. This is some more restraint. This is not too many specimens. That's a bulbini, a field of bulbine or bulbini in between. Some of you may have been here. This is Orange Coast Community College in Costa Mesa. Joe Stead, this is his garden. And that's, repetition is a good thing with succulent gardens. And this is a fantastic repetition of Agave Victoria Regina around a piece of petrified wood. If you have not had a chance to tour the Orange Coast College, I went there for the first time last year. I'd known about it forever, but I finally, Joe gave me a tour of it last year during COVID. He let me get in and walk around. It was really fun to check that place out. And then we have a section of agaves as container plants. Now, I mostly think of agaves as landscape plants, but there's a lot of small ones, small to medium-sized ones that are great in containers. And they can live their life for quite a while. Eventually, you might have to move them up into bigger pots. That's the Victoria Regina in the middle. The one on the top right is another fairly new introduction, Agave Albo Pilosa, with those little tufts of fuzz at the end of the leaves. It's a very small agave. The very first batch of those is now blooming in cultivation. They haven't been around that long. Top left is a Lophantha tricolor. That was a plant that maybe 20 years ago, because of the stunning variegation, when that first appeared, that was like one of these $300 eBay plants. But it is so prolific, I'm sure some of you have this, that it's, it'll throw pups through the holes in the bottom of plastic pots. It's one of those enthusiastic offsetters, so it's no longer rare or expensive. It's a very common plant now. It looks wonderful in that bowl of soft succulents, but as you know, it's going to own that bowl after a while. The pups will come up around the base and all the soft ones will disappear. And we have another chapter on succulent growers, where they come from, how they're propagated. This is at Succulent Gardens Nursery up in Watsonville. Gerhard Bach took this photo. He was one of our helpers. He supplied photos and helped us edit this book. You would not want to plant a garden like this. It's obviously too dense, and this is for propagation. And they've almost waited too long already to thin this out. That's going to be a problem. Well, I don't know whether they ever did get that thinned out. That interesting one, that stripe in the middle, from the middle going left to right, that one looks like Agave Mr. Ripple, which is a really nice cultivar of Salmiana, I believe. It might be a hybrid. I think it's a cultivar. And I mentioned Jeremy's Hidden Agave Ranch. Again, it's only a couple years old, but he's built a couple nice greenhouses out there. This is his war room where he creates new. He's good about collecting pollen, freezing pollen. He's got a small tissue culture lab on site, so he's really getting into producing some new plants. He's just starting to get some of them out there right now. But this is where he creates his little unusual beings. And we talk again about propagation too. This shows how you can grow. We talk about how you can grow agaves from seed or from bulbils if they produce those, or the example on the right of coring or halving, where you basically almost murder your invaluable plant in order to turn it into more plants. It's the hardest thing to do. Like crested plants, the crested myrtillo cactus. When I get those, I have to sell them like they are. I can't cut into them. They're too perfect. But I've got some backyard growers that are really good about slicing plants into more plants, and we need growers that are willing to take a knife to a plant to get more of them out there. But the halving, this example here, you cut it right in half, you plant each half, and little babies will start popping up around the base, assuming it survives, and they probably will survive. That's a variegated form of Avatifolia right there. And I always hate to dedicate any pages at all to bugs, pests, diseases, but you have to. So we kept it short, but we did talk about the agave snout weevil. I'm sure you've seen that. It mostly hits larger agaves, where that weevil, that stink bug looking thing, will insert its larvae into the base of the big agaves, and by the time you see the agave drooping, it's too late. It's gone. So I recommend you cut it up, dig out the core, and throw it away. On the right is agave mite, which is relatively new. It's been around for maybe 10 or 15 years. It's invisible things, and you don't know you have it until you have it. But that kind of rusty interior is what you see when you have agave mite. You can treat it with some nasty insecticides, but I hate to work with those. So you kind of have to isolate plants and get them away from your other plants. Spray with whatever you're comfortable spraying and hope it works. But it's just something we have to deal with. And other than bugs or vermin, there also are environmental issues with agaves, just like any other plants. You might recognize that agave attenuata in the middle, those are impact craters from hail. So, and this is a soft leaf agave, but it can happen on hard leaf agaves too. A good hailstorm will leave impact craters. So they're not going to go away, but eventually new leaves come out of the cone, and it'll start to look better later. And also when we have extreme weather events where it goes from a wet, rainy part of the episode into all of a sudden followed 2 days later by a Santa Ana. Sometimes strange weather events that happen in Southern California can freak plants out. That, as good as our environment is here, it's not exactly like where they evolved. So sometimes we just have situations that cause some stress on plants, and it's nobody's fault. We have a section on the inflorescence, the flower. I'm finally using that word inflorescence. I always thought that was kind of a hoity-toity word for flower, but it actually means the whole thing with all the flowers together is the inflorescence. Those are the individual flowers on the inflorescence. Agave Polona is kind of a pedestrian looking agave, but it probably is the prettiest blooming one. When you don't buy an agave for the flower, obviously, because it takes so long to flower, but some of them really have beautiful flowers. And the flowering event lasts, a month or two typically. And sometimes a dead expired flower stalk is a beautiful statement in your yard too. I've got a couple on the hill behind my house of big dead agave stalks, and they look wonderful. So the types of inflorescence, according to Gentry, he broke them down basically into the spicate or spicate form, which are the tall unbranched columns that you see on the left. That's Vilmariniana, and what's the other one? I can't think of it. It translates to golden tongue. Can't think of it right now. But those are examples of spicate inflorescence. On the right is what they call paniculate, where the more branched inflorescence, and they're sort of an in-betweens too. So Gentry broke them down into those two large categories. Within them, there's subgroups too, and we talk about that also in the book. Although most of us, I mean, we never even use the terminology regarding the subfamilies, et cetera, but it's good to know. On the left is an example of Agave montana blooming in Portland, Oregon, of all places. We found this online before the book went to press. Because it's from 10,000 foot elevation in Mexico, it can handle snow and cold weather. And this gentleman documented his agave montana blooming after 20 years in Portland. And we have a little 2-page spread in the book about it. He wrote us an essay about it. It's kind of an interesting little story about his apparently they had to put up traffic cones. It was such a popular thing in Portland that for weeks and weeks, people were coming by to check it out. Hummingbirds, you know, the agave, when your agave's flower, you get birds, you get bees, you get all that kind of stuff. So don't cut the flowers down. Let them do their thing. If you're not saving the plant by cutting the flower stalk off, you're just making it weird. So just let it bloom. Earlier I mentioned avatifolia. That's a group of agave avatifolias all flowering at the same time. That's down in San Clemente. You can tell this is probably the same tissue culture, same seed batch, because they're all at the exact same clock and they went off at the same time. On the right is a habitat shot. I think that's by Jeff Chemnick down in New Mexico. We had several really good photographers that helped us. Jeff Chemnick, Pam Coity Hyatt, Brian Kemble. We had Gerhard Bach. We had a few people that contributed some really wonderful photos for this book. So it's a combination of my photos, Jeremy's photos, and some others, people from what we call our friends in agave land. That's agave atrovirens with the red flowers. They open yellow, but they're really red before they open up. Cresting happens with agaves, but not much, and usually not spectacularly like you see in Cactus euphorbias, but it can happen. That's the crested agave shaw eye. This same plant, I went and revisited this a couple years after I took this photo, and it's really just a tangled mess right now. So rarely will you have a good-looking agave crest that stays good-looking. And there's other unusual things that happen. Some agaves will get this wonderful banded pattern on them. Some have more of a proclivity for it. Agave zebra is given that name because it really does that a lot. This is some unknown agave. I took this picture when I was in Tucson. It has to do with this fair nose white powder that the plants have on them, and through different seasons and wet events, it makes little the moisture, we think, makes little high tide marks that appear on the leaves over time. On the right, I gave some talks a couple of years ago out down the East Coast. This is in Maine, I believe. That's a poor agave blue glow in a torture chamber there in a restaurant. But, you know, I mean, it would die if it was outdoors there anyway. So I guess they're keeping it alive, but that's not how you want to grow your plants. And just before we get into the species section, we just have a series of beautiful photos of agaves in habitat. Jeremy took this picture of agave. It's a form of agave horrida in Mexico, in Oaxaca region, I think. And I wanted to use this photo. I thought it was beautiful, but he said, no, it's not exactly the holotype perfect representation of horrida, which I guess it's not. So we didn't run this picture, but I wanted to make sure I at least included it in my slideshow. We have a lot of pictures kind of like this in the book, like this one. That's agave avatifolia in habitat. This is Baja on the left. That's an Shaw's agave shawii. I'm getting ready to flower just south of the border. And the blue one on the right, you'll see more of this later. You'll see more of both of these later in the show. That's agave sebastiana, which is almost a blue form of shaw, but it evolved separately on Cedros Island, halfway down the Baja Peninsula. That's a wonderful destination if they let us go back to Cedros Island. It's closed off now to botany because of the poaching of the deadly Apachyphytum, unfortunately. But we got there about a year before they shut it down. We just a couple months before going to press, on Instagram, we found this German gentleman, Michael Bechtold, that has done a lot of trips to Mexico and photographed agaves and cactus. And he let us use some of his photos. I love this one. This is agave vilmariniana, the octopus agave blooming in habitat. That's what you call the spicate or spicate inflorescence. Newly described species, I believe, by Greg Starr. This is agave calciphylla down in the Nizanda region of Mexico. The caption for this is that this is like an example of what you'd call a terrestrial reef, like a limestone reef, because there's every available crack, just like a coral reef, has some living thing in it. There's the agaves, there's in the bottom right-hand corner, there's dichias or probably hectias growing. There's cactus coming out of the cracks. There's bushy plants. It's just a wonderful example of plants wanting to live and occupying every little nook and cranny that they could. There's little impact craters on those leaves too. That was some kind of a distress event, so it happens in habitat too. On the left is Agave Victoria Regina in habitat, growing in a little, it's obviously seeds germinated in the little cracks along the rocks. I love that staging of that. On the right is the northernmost colony, we think, of Agave Shawii, which is northern Baja, right along the coast into San Diego County. We think all the original clumps that existed in San Diego up to Torrey Pines State Park area probably had been dug up and moved over the years. This is on the Point Loma Naval Base, where it's basically in government housing where nobody can get to it. It's behind private property. So we think this is the northernmost untouched example of a Shaw's agave that there is for the native range. We just found this also just prior to going to press too. Jeremy got permission from the Navy to get in there and get this photo. This clump is slowly falling into the ocean. The cliff behind it is receding, and some of the plants are rolling around in the surf right now. And then we get into the species accounts. We couldn't decide how to group them, so we just went alphabetical. Agave Americana has been around forever, so it's kind of a pedestrian. Everyone's got it, and it gets big, and you got to be careful where you plant it. But it is a beautiful statement plant, the blue form. The variegated form, we take that for granted because it's been around forever. But what a plant! I mean, my caption for this is this plant. If you'd never seen it before, you'd be a first ballot succulent Hall of Fame plant because it's huge. It's had this wonderful octopus nature to it. It's really striking variegation. But it's prolific and it gets to be a problem too. So you have to be careful where you plant it. But they're landscape staples if you have a big area. And the soft-leafed agave that grows so wonderfully in California is difficult in the desert region. So it's a very Mediterranean plant, but it's a great landscape plant. It's not a real spectacular plant in the regular form. It's good for for repetition behind, but it blooms beautifully as you wear. It's got that what they call a foxtail bending inflorescence. On the left is the form that kind of is attenuata, but it's sort of its own species. It's called Bouton's Blue. It flowers straight up rather than curve. That's at the Huntington right there. But it's like blue attenuata. Top right is the variegated form, the beautiful striated variegated form, still commands a high price. The bottom right, that is the form you probably know called Agave attenuata Ray of Light. That's basically green with little yellow edge stripes, but this is the striated variegated form of Ray of Light, and you notice that it's much whiter. It's got more of a pale white color to it. There's not a lot of these out there yet. On the left is Agave bracteosa, almost not an agave looking plant. It's very smooth edges. It flowers beautifully too. It's a really nice plant. The regular form is green. This is just a nice mediopicta variegated version of it.
Excuse me, there's a question about were both of the first two agaves Americana. I would think that was on the last 2 pages,
Yeah.
2 slides that you had.
What's the
One
question?
there's the octopus looking one, and the other one such perfect form. They looked so different.
Yes, and that's a caption in the discussion on the plant. We talked about that too because they look like 2 different plants. And I've never seen the variegated one revert to normal blue, and I've never seen the blue one offer a variegated pup because the blue form is almost always more stiff and upright, and the variegated one can be the upright form, but quite often has an octopus nature. But we talked about that. So for now, we're calling the variegated one Americana. It may someday turn out to be something else because it is different in shape and form. But until we find out otherwise, that's what we're calling that thing. I agree with you.
I've seen some of those variegated ones have their own, like a cultivar name they've added to them now. I can't remember what some of them are, but the various leaf forms, some of them have another name that they've attributed to it besides just Americana variegated.
I'm sure they have, and we didn't include those. We saw a few, but we didn't know if they were official or not. But yeah, it should have its own handle. I'd like to find out exactly what it is because they sure do look like different plants to me. But that's where they are for now.
So both then the floppy ones and the upright ones that are variegated can both be considered Americana at this time.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now. And the upright form does look kind of like the blue one and just variegated. So
right. Thanks.
Well, Jeff, I just going way back to the beginning of your presentation, you showed a variegated Salmiana ferox, mediopicta, they're calling it.
Yeah.
And both Tim Harvey and Kelly Griffin will swear up and down that's just a regular Americana mediopicta. And but I know San Marcos and other places are distributing that as a ferox, Salmiana ferox. It looks nothing like that plant. It's so much smaller. It doesn't look anything like it. The terminal needle doesn't look anything like the Ferox, and yet it's being sold all over town as a Semionophora.
Yeah, I brought that up with Randy Baldwin when I was at San Marcos growers. I don't think it's
Oh,
the
good
same
for
plant
you.
either, because you know the one called Butterfingers. Oh, you'll see that coming up.
Yeah,
a little
that one's
Butterfingers.
spectacular.
Exactly.
That's
So what they're calling that other one, they sometimes call it, it's called Alex's agave for some reason. I don't know why. I agree with you. It does not look like Salmiana ferox. And we talked about that in the book too. It's a nice, beautiful variegated plant, but it's not nearly as thick. It's a different plant.
No, I have them side by. I have Butterfinger right next to that one in my yard, and Butterfinger's 10 times the size.
Yeah, and Butterfinger just looks like ferox, like it's just a variegated ferox.
Yeah, it does.
So this is Bova cornuta, the cow's horn agave, because if you look closely, some of those, I don't know if you can see where's my cursor? Uh-oh, I can't use my cursor. Anyways, some of the horn, the spines face each other like cow horns. Another beautiful imprinted agave. This one's, they're kind of messing around with this for hybrids too. It looks like it'd be a really good hybrid parent for different plants. Not common yet in cultivation. This is agave Chazeroy. This looks like a staged on an artificial like rockery that they built at the San Diego Zoo or something, but this is an actual habitat shot that Jeremy took. It gets to be a pretty big plant, like an 8x8 plant, but we just don't have a lot. The Rancho Soledad nursery grew a bunch of these about 10, 12 years ago. So there's some around in San Diego, but you don't see them too often. We're showing you the rare ones and the common ones and the rare ones. We try to get everything we could possibly get into the book. If we pass in any agaves, and we didn't get them all, it's some of the more pedestrian ones that really have no ornamental zing at all. This is Cremnophylla, which I think means rock loving or hidden. No, it was Cremno. Yeah, I can't remember what that means. But this shows, whenever we can, we wanted to show how they grow in habitat. So that's a good example of how they grow vertically in rock habitat in Mexico. And it's a nice little dwarf agave. That's blooming in Kelly Griffin's yard, the photo on the right. It looks like about 5 other agaves that we talked about some of these lookalikes. It's hard to identify, differentiate some of these. Cupriata is a fairly recent introduction. It's slowly making inroads in cultivation, but you don't see very many. It's a nice mid-sized one with nice imprinting and mammillate dentation. It's a really nice plant. This is obviously down in Mexico here. When I first opened my nursery back in the early 90s, Rancho Soledad had the first one of these I'd ever seen. I didn't even know if it was agave. I didn't know what it was. It's agave desmetiana. It's a fairly smooth plant. It's got very minor ridges. It's a medium small agave. It doesn't get real big. This is an extra sort of more of a lime yellow one than the typical form. There is a regular blue-green form that nobody really wants anymore. They like the variegated one, but it's a great landscape plant. The landscapers, along with like Blue Glow, they found this is a great plant for repetitions. It blooms kind of quick. It blooms at, maybe 7 or 8 years, but it's one that quite often offers bulbils too. So you end up with more plants after it blooms. But it's just a nice, the shape is so nice in these. They look great in an urn or a pot. Elamitiana. This is not too common yet. You can tell it's a lot like attenuata, but it is different. It's bigger. It's got a little bit more serration to the edge. It flowers a little bit different. We're hoping that it doesn't pup much, so you don't see too many of these. This is another example of a terrestrial reef down in Mexico. Soledad has grown some of these. I think Jeremy's trying to get another batch of them going. There's a couple forms of them. This is one that was discovered like 150 years ago. It disappeared, and then they rediscovered it. So other than Americana, there's a couple of other big blue agaves. This is the easiest one to confuse with Americana. Franzosinii in the true form looks like this. It has these really recurved waterfall shaped leaves. It's got this, if you look closely in the middle, this one doesn't show it too much, but it has these blue watermarks, kind of stains on it. That's typical. I mean, otherwise, other plants, if you have that blue watermark, that might be agave mite, but in this case, it's just a sort of a watermarking that the plant does. And it's as big or bigger than Americana. They're a little bit more of a powder blue color. It's a real beautiful statement plant. This one is for a big space. This particular one, the entrance to the Huntington, there's a bunch of them at Lotus Land. You see them around quite a bit, but it's a beautiful ornamental plant. It will puff a little bit, but not as profusely as Americana does. Somebody unmuted, or is there a question there?
Sorry, I took care of it.
Okay.
I got a question about this. There's
Yeah.
a gray form of Americana looks very similar to that they call that Franzinii, but it's not really that plant, is it? Is there more?
No.
The teeth are much smaller and closer together, aren't they?
Yes, and then we talk about that in the book too. That's
You know what that is?
well, everybody debates. They call it the sawtooth form or the Soledad form because 20 years ago, Rancho Soledad sold those as Franzosinii. but it is more stiff, it's more upright. It's probably part this crossed with maybe Midas or something else. We don't really know, but it is visually distinguishably a different plant. Also
It seems
nice.
to- I see that around in huge numbers all over the place. That
I
seems
think
to
it's a
be-
more prolific offsetter too.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're not sure the parentage, and we talk about that in the Franciscini section, that there is a visually distinct different plant that has that, goes by that name sometimes. But you're right, it has smaller, finer teeth, and it's a little bit more upright in nature. Gentrii is not seen too often, but it's a nice big wide-bladed green one. It's a big plant, spectacular. I call that the caveman club in fluorescence. There's a few that do this kind of really fat, stout club-like flower. Brian Kemble took these photos down in Habitat. This particular form has a little bit more of a ovate, rounded leaf than the regular form, which is a little bit more of a longer leaf example of it. High elevation plant. That's an example of a variegated plant in Habitat. So that it doesn't happen often in Habitat, but you will see those. This is Michael Bechtold, the German gentleman we met. This is his photograph. Guadalajara. I believe there are 8 letter A's in the name of that plant. A little bit of trivia for you. It's one of the prettiest blue agaves. It really is blue. It's nice and compact. Most of them have kind of a shark skin feel to them. We're going to try to get more of these into cultivation. I think it's a great mid, not small, but mid-size agave. With beautiful imprinting and blue color. And the new teeth will sometimes come in really, we have a picture in the book of the new teeth coming in really bright yellow and orange. They fade to black and then gray as they get older. Guingola on the left is one of those big giant ones with a really wide, quickly tapering leaf. It usually kind of grows off to its side. Their big example of this is landscapes around town. Huntington has some big ones. Gypsicola on the right is new. The first batch of that, Jeremy grew a bunch from seed, and I've got a couple at home now that are maybe 2 feet across. It looks like it's going to be a good landscape plant, but it's not commonly available yet. It's got very fine serrated leaf edges. They grow in a cloud forest down in Mexico, up pretty high elevation, but they look like they're going to be good growers. This is the aforementioned Lophantha. It's called quadricolor because there's 2 types of green and a yellow, and sometimes in stress it gets a little bit pink. So it's a little bit, the name's a little misleading. I think tricolor is a better name, but it's called quadricolor. And you can see that's why it's no longer rare. Look how it puffs. The regular version, non-variegated version of this plant is also kind of a 2-tone green, so it almost looks variegated even though it isn't. But it's just the regular form is not popular anymore because everybody wants this one here. Another one of our top plants that has we have too many photos of it in the book, we can't help, is Agave horrida. Just look at the beautiful teeth, the beautiful indentation on this plant. It's a small to mid-size agave. On the right is an example of it in Habitat, showing a little bit more of a stress blush to it. So they can get that kind of color. In cultivation, where you kind of baby them a little bit too much. The left is a plant in my collection that I got from Rudy Lime years ago. That it's just, I describe it, it's about 10 or 15% extra gnarly teeth. So there's just variability within plants. And so this one's just has a little bit more wicked teeth than normal. It's great. It's a great agave. This is Agave impressa. That doesn't mean impressive. It just talks about the impressions on the leaves, the leaf imprints. That's an extra white form, extra beautiful imprints on this one on the left. That's in Habitat. The ones you'll see in cultivation do have the white impressions on them, but not quite as good as this form does here. We're hoping somebody collects seed from this particular colony and gets the seed up here. It really is beautiful. He shows this spicate inflorescence on the right. When you're trying to do a group of agaves into similar, groups to see how closely related they are, we think the flowers are a better tell than what the leaves look like on the plants. This is not in cultivation yet. It's newly described. It's called Aloe magnifica. It looks a little bit like Celsius, which is now called Midas. But look at the different colors. The bottom side of the leaf is a light glaucous color, and it's more of a lime green on the top of the leaf. It's really a pretty 2-tone agave. There's a couple I have a little baby one that I got. Jeremy got it roundabout through a German seed collector. It looks nothing like this yet. We're hoping as they get bigger, they'll start to look like this, but that might be a really good landscape plant if it makes it to us. Macrocantha, this is a really good small one, and it's variable. They're generally blue to blue-gray. There's variegated forms. It's being used quite a bit in the hybrids. You'll see a little bit later the one's called Little Shark. Little Shark is this in Victoria Regina, or there's different combinations, but it's a good hybrid parent. It's a nice, small, clumping, small agave. Very, Very unforgiving spines, though. This one will bite you if you're not careful. Agave margarite is from the Isla Margarita, about 3/4 of the way down the Baja Peninsula. They're indigenous to just a couple islands, but it's really variable on those islands too. Jeremy's been there a couple times collecting seed. He's hoping to get some unusual forms of this plant into cultivation too. And Montana is one of our favorites. This is that high elevation one that I showed you a picture earlier, blooming in Portland. This is it down in Mexico, up in the cloud forest, up in the the pine forest where it lives. Although they grow fine at sea level here too. We found that we can grow them here. Look at the flower on this thing. It's just a giant club of a flower, and then it opens in this beautiful paniculate inflorescence. And you see sometimes, not all of them, but sometimes they'll get that red color as the plant blooms out and dies. These photographs here by in Habitat by Jeff Chemnick and Brian Kimball. Just more pictures of the flower. On the right, that's Michael Bechtold from Germany that's standing next to one. Shows you, gives you an example of the size. And it almost looks like the plant, if you look at the plant, it looks like it's almost lit from inside. In the middle picture, that's Lance Wright up in Portland. He's measuring his famous, he named it Monty, Montana, the blooming plant in Portland. We've always known this plant as I mentioned before, as Agave Celsii, but it's been renamed back into the older name, which is Agave mitis. And this is an example too of these lateral inflorescence. Some plants will put out a main flower and also send out accessory smaller flowers around the base of it. Mitis will do that. In fact, the form of on the left there, that one's called albicans. It's sort of a lighter color. If you look on this one, the inflorescence is coming out the side and not at the top. So if it will flower out of the side, then the growing cone is undisturbed. So this is one example of an agave that will keep living after it flowers. Now, if the flower comes out the middle, probably not, or else it'll kick more plants out of the side. Nicholsii is formerly, that was Ferdinand or Ferdinandi Regis. They've renamed this back to an older name to honor Anna Nichols, who brought the first examples of this across the border into Texas 100 and something years ago. It's like Victoria Regina, but it's got more of these dark black tips, and there's little accessory hooks and spines on the black tips also. It's a little bigger and a little less striped than Victoria Regina. Okahui, this is a half parent of Blue Glow, which I'm sure all of you know. We'll see Blue Glow a little bit later. Blue Glow is, I think, Okahui and Attenuata, I believe. That's a high leaf count. You know, some agaves, it might only be 6 or 8 leaves around. As you go around, this one has a very high batch of leaves on it. The whale's tongue, Avatifolia in Habitat. Just almost a perfect plant. This is one of my favorite agaves. Another Habitat shot on the left. On the right is an example of one blooming in Del Mar, and it did bloom in about 10 years. So it's an early flowering plant. Seed is good. I know several people have collected seed and had new plants develop. An example in the residential landscape, this is kind of a dense planting, but it looks really cool. That's a yucca, probably linearifolia behind, and then a vatifolia of cotyledons in front. That's a nice glaucous texture that they did in that landscape. But it's a lot of plants per square inch. They could have planted it a little less dense, but I'm sure when they put it in, they were small plants, so they wanted to fill it up. Variegated whale's tongue right there. There's several variegated forms of vatifolia. That's a Jeremy's yard. This is Agave parasana. You saw this a little bit earlier. It's a nice blue grade of blue agave with beautiful imprinting. This is a Rancho Soledad. It looks like Habitat, but this is just in Rancho Soledad nursery in San Diego. This is a very steep cliff behind one of the nurseries, and they just carved some holes in the sandstone cliff and stuck some pups in. They grew just like Habitat. This is Parasana in Habitat on the left. On the right is an example of it flowering. Look how big that flower is next to the size of the plant. That's why the agaves, they have to die when they flower. They put all that energy. How can a plant survive? All that redirection of all, I mean, there's probably more mass in that flower, and it's not even full size yet, than there ever was in the plant. And one of the favorite landscape plants in Southern California is the Agave perii. The Huntington clone, the big wide-bladed form on the left, is probably the truncata Huntington clone is probably the best form of it. That shows the beautiful flowers. And you see the babies around the base, so that will send out some offsets a little bit away from the parent plants. That's an example of it on the right, also in Habitat. These are another couple habitat photos. There's various forms of perii. The one on the left there is a variety wacusensis. The one on the right is either perii or it's perii truncata, but it's not the Huntington clone version of truncata. Just beautiful plants, I think. Polona. This can be a pure green plant. I've got one of these and mine is all green. I'd love for it to get this color. So it's sort of a stress issue. That's a habitat photo on the left. Kelly and Jeremy and several people have taken photos in habitat of this particular group that always has that color. The photo on the right is a gentleman in Vista that did get his to color up in cultivation. So it is doable. Probably through some combination of stress and poor soil. There's Jeremy. He's next to a Agave pedunculifera in habitat. It's another one of those ones that looks a lot like attenuata, but it is different than attenuata. It's much bigger. He spends a lot of time in Mexico. This is where that particular plant grows. But see those little blue spots all over that cliff? That's pedunculifera growing and how it grows. I mean, it does grow on flat. Apparently, I have not been there yet, but it grows on flat plains too. But a lot of these are great, just like Dudley's are, about inhabiting inaccessible rocks, cliffs, so that will keep them from going extinct, hopefully. I don't know if these are being collected in habitat anyways. Look how beautiful that thing is. Looks like somebody pulled out a paint pen and just drew these perfect, thick white lines. Pintilla or Pintia it's in the Victoria Regina complex, but it is a fairly newly described variety or species. It's its own plant, and it is distinguished by how thick the painting is on it and the leaf count. There's a couple other subtle characteristics. I have a little baby one that looks nothing like this yet. I'm hoping someday it'll end up looking like this. So not that available yet, but what a gorgeous plant. Potatorium is a very variable group of plants. I'm only showing you a couple of up close detail photos. It's a mid-sized blue-gray sort of wavy leafed agave. The form on the right is called Spawn. It's a cultivar that has these crazy, wicked, contorted teeth like that. Polyanthiflora is one of about 5 or 10 small agaves that have these filaments on them. We talk about them and the difficulty in distinguishing between this and several other Filifera and several others. That's a variegated form on the left, a really, really pretty plant in the variegated form. Quota piquensis is one that has recently been very similar to Titanota and gives Brechtia and a couple others, but it's been separated off from those. This particular one is in Kelly Griffin's yard. It has wonderful, I think, teeth and imprinting on it. This is that big one we talked about earlier, the Salmiana ferox. This is at the Mission Santa Barbara. So it's a giant green agave. There's one called Green Goblet that has these wonderful spination. That's the one on the right, I believe. The variegated form of Salmiana ferox is the one we were talking about earlier. That's Butterfingers. It looks just like the big thick leaf form, but it's green with yellow. So it's very different from that one we were talking about earlier. On the right is a picture. That's the back of the hill behind my house. I planted a couple, and they took about 20 years from 5-gallon size to flower. So they bloomed at 22, 23 years old. Big flowers. Now I've got a project. I got to get those things out of there. It's not going to be fun. Shidigera is one of the foliferous types. This particular form is called Durango Delight. I think Greg Star isolated. They're normally not that lime green yellow. It's more of a dull, darker green. But this particular one, I photographed the Soledad nursery, had this really pretty lime green color. I don't know if there's many of these available yet. Sebastiana, we saw earlier. This is the form from Cedros Island. It's a really pretty blue form. It's a lot like Shy, but it's much bluer. It's got a big, thick flower like Shy does. That's an elephant tree, a Pachycormus discolor behind it. Cedros Island is covered with these giant fat elephant trees. Just amazing plants. It's a very dry island, but the north tip of it has some wonderful flora. On the right is sort of a monstrose wavy version. You'll see occasionally a monstrose growth in some of these agaves. That's the hilltop in the very northern end of Cedros Island, where that's Sebastiana there in the photo on the left. That little pine forest to the right, that's around the hill from there. That's where the Dudleya pachyphytum grow. The very, very small population, that very rare Dudleya that is now off limits because it's been poached. They've been cut up a lot. There's been a lot of illegal trade in that plant. And one of our favorites, because we consider it our native plant since it bleeds into San Diego County, is Agave Shaw's agave. It is part of the California biome, so I consider this a native plant. That's down by Punta Colonet, a couple hundred miles south in Baja. That red background plant, that's Mesembryanthemum crystallinum, that has colonized all of Residuos Island, everywhere in Baja. It's a South African plant that's been there for 100 years, so it's not going anywhere. And look how Shy blooms. It's a beautiful, big, thick, strong flower. The red buds open yellow. It's also a great parent plant. There's some nice hybrids being made from Shy now. It's the teeth. There's a lot of variability in the teeth. On the right, that's a variegated example in habitat. So again, variegation does occasionally happen in habitat. That plant is right looking over the ocean too. We were reluctant to tackle, how are we doing on time? Am I running late here? I should wrap this up. I'm gonna go quick at the end here.
You're fine.
Am I okay?
It's okay to go over. That's fine.
Okay. Titanota oteroi. But there's a lot of controversy between these plants and experts. I'm not going to name anybody, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I vehemently disagree. It's a lumpers and splitters battle over which belong to which. Generally, the green ones are kind of oteroi or oterai. The blue ones are Titanota. They overlap in habitat. There's different forms of each, so it's really hard to identify. The shapes are similar. They have these nice woody teeth. It's a mid-sized plant with wide blades and sort of a low leaf count. And I have not been down to this habitat. Jeremy's been down there a bunch. So it's really wonderful. He says it's variable, but it's really hard to pigeonhole exactly what plant you're looking at. And look at the variability of these plants. Look at the teeth in that one on the left. That thing is just spectacular, right? It looks comical, or phantasmagorical is the word we use for it in the book. The blue one on the right is another form. So I call the one on the right a Titanota. I'd call the one on the left a form of oteroi, but different people, experts will give you different opinions on that. Tequilana. I always want to say tequiliana, but it's pronounced tequilana. It's the one tequila is made from. One of the ones tequila is made from. It's the long, thin, blue-bladed one. There's another one called Forcroides that's similar. That's another clone or hybrid. But this is what tequilana looks like in the non-variegated form. This is at the Huntington right here. Stricta and striata, even after writing a book about this, you should show me one of each and I couldn't tell you which is which. They both look the same. There's only one letter difference between the names too. If you take out replace a C with an A, they're the same plant. So they're really hard to identify, but they grow nicely in these tight clumps. Some of them will fade purple in times of duress. We were conflicted because we almost didn't want to include Utahensis because people are poaching these from our native deserts. These are from the Eastern California into Nevada. High elevation plants, they don't do that well at sea level. I mean, if you grow them from seed, you got a shot, but people that have tried to dig these up and bring them down the hill, they generally don't have success. We really discourage people from poaching these, but what can you do? Word is out about these, but look how fantastic the various forms of them are. I think these are a variety Eborospina here. There's Utahensis, there's a couple forms of them. But it's almost comical how wonderful the spination is on these plants. Good old Victoria Regina, that's not a great looking plant, but we had to show this canyon, this habitat photo of where they're from down in Mexico. It forms this nice, tight, artichoke-shaped bowling ball in the best forms of it. That one on the right, that was in my yard. I planted this plant about 3 years before this photo. I thought not quite full size. Sure enough, shortly after I planted it, there goes the flower being into the plant. But it's a spectacular thing to watch. Watch it do its thing over a period of time. This one here, this just happened this year. I took this photo on the left, and the picture with that flower stalk on the right is not even 2 weeks later. So that shows you how fast the flower stalks grow. They grow quick, and then they're done. This plant, Agave victoriana, is like a lot of agaves. It will have made pups early in its life. Like when they're small, they'll have pups. You pull those off, and after a period of time, they go through agave menopause. There's no more babies. So you got to get the pups off early because they'll stop doing that after a period of time. And there's a lot of forms. There's a beautiful variegated form on the bottom. The one on the top left is one of the most sought after ones called White Rhino or Alba marginata. On the right is there's several forms that are, just like any type of plant, there's always exceptional forms. There's one called Snow Queen or Snow Princess. We're not sure if this is that. Gerhard Bach took this picture. And he said that plant bloomed, is UC Davis. It bloomed and is gone now, and no one ever got any seed or pollen off of it. Vilmariniana, you saw that earlier, the flowering, that's the octopus agave. That looks like habitat, but that's my friend's backyard in East County, San Diego. He planted them up on a hill behind his house, never waters them. They're just established. They survive in rainwater only. They're that tough. A lot of agaves are that tough. On the right is Xylonacantha, which is really variable. Most of them are not as blue as this example, and they're not quite as imprinted as nicely. So this is a really superior form of a Xylonacantha, which means woody teeth. This one, I think it's called swordfish. It's sort of new. There's Vilmariniana, again, flowering in the landscape. They're prolific. The last couple of years, it's reached critical mass. When you see these things, they're blooming all over Southern California all at the same time, it seems like. In this case, it was mostly in this last spring. Agave zebra. This is in habitat. Jeremy took this just before we took the book to press. That shows you the striping that zebra gets, and that's how a lot of agaves will grow in nature, sort of growing in the cracks and rocks and growing sort of vertically like that. Now we're into the end of the book. We're talking about the hybrids. There's Blue Glow. I took this picture at David Hodgson's yard in San Pedro a couple of years ago. After talking to your club, I drove by and checked out his house. I guess he's moved. That was a fantastic garden he put in. Blue Glow is one of our favorites. And it was our little sort of secret plant in the plant business about 20 years ago, but then the landscape industry found out about it. And you see them everywhere now, but that's good because it's a nice, small, mid-sized agave it's just a wonderful landscape plant. Red Margin is very similar, but it's a different cross. But it also is more prolific about forming babies, which Blue Glow rarely, if ever, does. Blue Ember is another hybrid that's making the rounds as some form of Victoria Regina and Macrocantha, as is this plant here, the Little Shark of Royal Spine. It's a nice 2x2, maybe 3x3 at the most agave. Cornelius is an old hybrid that's been around forever. It's got this monstrous wiggly leaf form. It's always variegated. Brian Kimball did show me a picture of a green one. Didn't look very spectacular, but we're not really sure what really the parentage is on that plant. On the right is Kishokan, which is a form of, we think, Ismensis or Pototorum. It's the parentage. We're not sure where this plant came from. I think it came from Japan. So it's a hybrid. I mean, it's from Mexico, but someone in Japan came up with this either hybrid or cultivar that went variegate. There's also a non-variegated form, but the variegated form is more popular. And then we have about 6 or 8 pages on new hybrids. Some of these Jeremy, some of these Kelly, some of them other growers, and they don't even have names yet. So these are, we're just kind of teasing you with some pictures. I like the one on the right. It looks like an impala or corn on the top of that the spine right there. So these, we give you some ideas of what some of the parentage is. Some of these will make it to market. Some of them might not. It depends on the durability and how easy they are to replicate. But these are at present unavailable. And then the last section of the book, we talk about the recent phenomenon of mangaves. I remember coming to your show a couple of years ago, giving a talk, and you had a couple of mangaves on the display table I'd never seen before. I think it was the kaleidoscope. There's just so many of these coming out. This is the test bench at San Marcos Growers in Goleta. And they're wonderful plants. You know, Manfredas are these soft tuberous things that look nothing like agaves, but they would figure out they could cross them. And some of them look like agaves, some of them are softleaf plants that look like Manfreda. And now they're back crossing mangaves with agaves. So they're going to be 2/3 or 3/4 agave with just a little bit of Manfreda. It's going to make identification very difficult, but it's going to be a fun problem because there's going to be a lot of wonderful new plants available. They behave basically like agaves. They flower a little earlier. They flower like at maybe 5 to 7 years. So you don't get as long a life out of them. Most of them will form babies around the base of the flower stalk like Blue Glow does. So you can offset babies, but it's more of a difficult process to do that. Tooth Fairy is one of my favorites. I know Agave Shaw is the parent of that, is the agave parent of that plant. I love the teeth on that one. And that Silver Fox on the left, it looks like it's like blue denim. The color on that is really nice. I have that Lavender Lady. I have that at my house. I think in the photo on the right, in the front, I think that's a true Manfreda. That's not a Mangave. Those are Mangaves behind it. Kaleidoscope, I believe, is the variegated one, and that's Lavender Lady behind that. And we close out the book with just some cool pictures. That's an example of an agave that obviously grows where it can snow. It's okay with the snow. A guy that we found on Instagram, he photographed this in, I think, New Mexico this last year. I think that's an agave perii underneath there. And then I end with a commercial. That's my nursery on the left. I have those of you that have not been on Solana Beach, please come down. It's a small nursery full of wacky, crazy plants. I'm trying to get as many agaves as I can in anticipation of the book, but I have, you know, aloes and cactus and everything I can fit in there. And those are my 4 books on the right. Under the Spell Succulents is the overall about the whole hobby. The subsequent books have been just drilling down in more details on what was in the first book. Aloes and agaves, soft succulents, spiny succulents, now the agave book. And then they're all available on my website, www.solanasucculents.com. You can pre-buy the agave book there, the softcover version. If you want hardcover, you got to contact me separately. And as soon as I get them, I'll mail them to you. I've already got about 20 or 30 pre-orders. And lastly, this is the book we're working on next. So we're sliding over to a Dudley book, which is overdue. If those of you don't know the own from a long time ago, it's nice, but we need a Dudley book. So Jeremy and I are working on this with a couple other contributors. We really need to kick it into gear now. So hopefully in another year or 2, we'll have that book out. You guys have any questions about anything?
Well, I want to thank you, Jeff. I love all your books. I'm so pleased you're going to do the Dudley book finally. And I look forward to the agave book. For those of you who've never been to Solana Succulents, it's a really fun place to go. It's right close to where my son lives, so I go there often, and I always walk out with a plant, even when I swear I'm not going to buy anything. So it's a fun place. So thanks, Jeff, for having that.
Thank you. I always tell my customers that, you know, you don't need these plants at all, except they make you happy. That's you know, logically, you know, there's no reason that you have to buy a succulent, but I know it is like you see something you have to have, and you know, that's why I have a shop selling it. I'm one of you. I know about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeff, this is Gary Duke.
Hi, Gary.
Maybe I missed it, but what have you reclassified agave neo-mexicana as?
I have not. I read about that. I'd have to look in the book. I think we addressed that a little bit. Neo-Mexicana, from what I read, is a field hybrid. They thought. But it's been in different groups. And I got to tell you, Gary, that group, the ones that Jeremy and I had the least experience with are those, what we call the lanceolate desert agaves, those blue-gray spiky ones that are all over Arizona and New Mexico. Man, they look alike, some of those things. And they're so hard to differentiate. So neither of us had much experience with that. We kind of relied on a few other people to tell us what they knew, and also research we got online. So that one, I don't know the answer on that.
Okay, so if I keep the name the same, I'm not in violation of anybody.
The 3 people that might give you a bad time, ignore them.
Okay.
That's what we found with all this stuff. You know, we put a book like, we want to get it as right as we can. And you get really, you know, down the weeds and trying to get these names right. But you know that no matter how hard you try, the book's going to come out, and I'm not going to name names, but I know some people that are going to look at it completely critically. They're not going to look for the beauty that most of us look and just enjoy it. They go, oh, I don't know about that. And they're going to find that kind of stuff. And some of them, they might be right, or it's just up to debate. And no decision has been made on the name yet.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
It's Maria again. Do you include agave shark skin?
Yes, we have a brief bio on shark skin in there too, which I believe that one is the field hybrid, right? That is.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful plant. That is probably the most unforgiving leaf of any agave. That thing is so thick and immovable. Yeah, we've got that. And Jeremy found a hybrid of shark skin, something else at a nursery that he's going to try to propagate. It's a really, really big, impressive plant. Yeah, we could. Yeah, go ahead.
I've had some people contact me about that. You know, where can I buy one? I want a big
that's
one.
the hard.
Yeah, they're hard to get big, but
it's hard to get certain agaves. You know, it's a tease showing you some of these plants, because some of them are so hard to find. You know, some of them are easier, some of them are difficult. We didn't want to show you too many that you're never going to find, but when we had a pretty photo, we had to run it, and we tell you if it's commonly available or not. And we couldn't fit them on. There's a whole bunch of Caribbean agaves that are wonderful plants, but they're just not in cultivation here. We probably get too cold here. So in the very end of the book, we covered maybe half the agaves in the book, or 2/3, but at the index, we tried to put every single agave name we could find. And then the ones that are in bold are the ones that are in our book, and the ones that are not in bold are not in the book. Just so if you're looking for a name, you can't find it, at least we acknowledge the name. And some of the names are archaic or extinct names too. So that muddies the water also.
Oh,
Yeah,
great. That sounds good.
I was glad to hear so many of the ones you said that these aren't really available yet, that I have a few of those already. So
Well,
That's kind of exciting.
they're not publicly available, but there's a couple out there. Yeah, like I've got that one little teeny, what was that one? I forgot the name of it already. Magnifica. So we're hoping that when they get big enough, somebody like Jeremy's going to core them and tissue culture them to get more of them out there. But you're not going to find them in a nursery. You might find some online from various sources.
Well, I have a question for you. It's kind of an old wives' tale. People, I was down at Jeremy's, and I know he recently moved his avotafolias, and both of them are in bloom. You said something about moving a plant and it went into bloom. And there's an old wives' tale that says if you move a large agave, it's probably going to bloom soon. The chances are it's going to bloom soon. I just moved a large Victor Regina a couple of years ago, and it bloomed within a month of moving it into the ground.
I think there's probably truth in that wives' tale. I don't know from experience, but intuitively, the plant's shocking, and it's trying to reproduce itself before it dies. Somebody should do that. They should grow a batch in the field, and when they're getting close to full size, pull a couple out and set them aside and see if it happens. I don't know, but that makes sense that could be a true thing.
Have you ever heard it before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, plants in stress will bloom sometimes. That's a stress flower, like a desperation flower.
Sure.
So I think that does happen.
Jeff, would you end your share screen, please?
Yes.
Can I ask
That
a
way-
question?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Jeff, I've got all your books so far and I can't wait for the Dudley's.
Oh, good.
I didn't even know what the heck they were years ago, and I just fell in love with them. So I've got a little collection of Dudley's. They're in pots on a bench.
Mhm.
They face the northeast, so they get sun in the morning, but shade from noon on. Shade all the rest of the day. And they seem happy. Now, here's my question. Can they be transplanted, and where?
Well, yeah. Are they individuals? Or are they clumping ones?
Well, that's a good question.
If it's a clumping one, I'd take a couple.
For all these years, they've been individual. They're not clumping in the pots.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they could be transplanted. Sure. Sometimes they move them too soon into a really sunny place they're not used to. They might burn a little bit because they're not used to it. But yeah, they should be able to be transplanted.
At any time of the year?
Well, Dudley's being native plants are winter growers. I would rather do it as it's coming into the growing season rather than when they're going dormant. So I would.
So in the late fall,
In
Yeah,
the
like
fall.
in a couple
In the
of months, I
fall,
would think would
Ruth.
be the best time.
right?
Dudley's can be easy growers, and some of them are difficult growers. They're not all easy plants. There's a couple of them that are. Britannia is the best one. It's the biggest white one that it accepts some summer water, where the native pulverulenta doesn't like it. And Dudley's are also hard to identify and differentiate too. So this could be another frustrating book to get exactly right. But we've got a lot of beautiful photos already because Dudley is hanging over the ocean in Big Sur, and we've got some beautiful photos of them. So I'm looking forward to getting the book going. I just need to kick Jeremy. We have to kick ourselves into gear to get working on it. We're trying to get Kelly and Steve McCabe involved, but we're having trouble getting them on board. So Jeremy and I are going to push through ourselves.
After all these years, are they better off left in their pots?
If they're happy, yeah. You could try. If you have more than one, just do a couple of them. But yeah, generally most plants, Dudley's included, are happy moving up occasionally.
I don't want to lose any. Okay.
Speaking of Dudley's, that's my screen back here.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks a
That's
little bit
from,
like, you said that was a Catalina one I heard you say?
Yeah, that's in Santa Catalina Island. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny because it looks almost a little bit like the one from Cedros. It's got those kind of stubby leaves, the Pachyphyta, but I guess it's not. But it looks a little bit like
No, yeah.
Yeah, the white ones are the most ornamental. There's a bunch of Dudleys that are green, and some of them don't have a lot of ornamental zing, and some of them are really dwarf and they disappear completely and come back. But we're going to try to cover them as best we can, anyways.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, just for your information, since you live down in San Diego, this is Gary Duke again. East of San Diego, out towards Valley Center, Escondido, that area, there's two kinds of pulverulenta. One of them has what I would call the thin pulverulenta shaped leaf. but there's another one down there that gets almost a quarter of an inch thick. It has the same shaped leaf. Still has the same red flowers, so I think it's a pulverulenta. But the leaf form is very, very thick.
I'm not familiar with that. If you're ever out there, you can take some pictures of them so I can compare them or tell me locations. I'll have Jeremy go take a look at them.
Okay, well, I was gonna say I got some in my yard, but that I
Yeah.
had collected seed from, and I've got
Oh.
them growing here, but
Well, that's the thing about dudleys, they're so variable, and across the range, they just integrate and turn into something else. Like pulverulenta, as you get farther east, turns into the Arizonica, which is kind of
Right.
like it, but it's different too. So it's going to be a challenge to put this together and get it exactly right because they blend.
yeah, I didn't know of any. I mean, Pachyphytum is out on Cedrus Island, but there aren't too many really thick leaved dudleys. So but since it ended up with a red or pink flower, I said, well, I guess
I'd like to
is.
see here. Send me some pictures, either the ones you have
Okay.
yourself or the one if you're out there in the habitat again. I'd like to see it because I might not be familiar with that one. Maybe Jeremy is.
Yeah,
All right,
so
guys,
guys,
well, hey-
just send them to him. Hey, Jeff, I want you to hang out for 1 second.
Okay.
Our next thing up is a PowerPoint of photos that people have sent us
Oh,
for our plan of the month, but one of our first that I put just because of today's presentation. Let's see here. Can you see that?
yeah.
This is a Dale Chihuly glass sculpture
Wow.
that was in the Bronx Botanic Gardens. It's the New York Botanic Garden when Dale Chihuly did a presentation of his glass sculpture. And I just thought this
Beautiful.
looked like a agave.
Yeah, it's an
And wanted
agave
to
and
show that.
it's sending out its life force or something.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that great?
Yeah, it really is.
So I thought you'd appreciate it.
I do. That's like agave in art. There's so many agaves represented in art all over the place.
Yeah,
And it's a really
yeah.
iconic looking thing for a logo or for whatever. So it's there you see a lot
Yeah.
of that.
Well, it is the logo for our club as well. So
I
Agave.
probably have to see that again. I forgot. No, I did.
yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
Thanks. So if you're interested, if you last sales pitch here, if you go to my website, www.solanosucculents.com, you can pre-order the book and I'll mail it to you as soon as it comes in, or else come down by the nursery. I'll have them at the shop, hopefully in a couple of weeks also. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Do me a favor, Jeff. If when you have them, you email me, I can let everyone know.
Okay.
Because I think it'd be more advantageous if people can come down to the shop to get it then. But if anyone wants to.
That's always preferable. Then I
Okay.
can sell you some plants too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know
Thank you.
how much
Sign the
they will
book.
be yet?
Well, how much?
Yeah,
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
know
the-
yet?
Yeah, the soft cover is $39.95, the same as my spiny book and my aloe book, and the hardcover. You have to call me. Hardcover's not, you can't get it online. You got to call me for that one. We did a limited number of hardcover. They're going to be $69.95, $20 more.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. Okay, thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
I'm going to sign out.
See you
Bye-bye.
soon. Okay, bye. Okay, everyone. So we are at our brag plants, and Bernard took this photo a long time ago, but sent it in. So we'll go with our brag plants that people sent in. So Karen Cozzolino sent in a number of brag plants. And unfortunately, this was too late for last month's plant of the month, but these are beautiful flowering stapelias.
With flies.
With flies. They love those flowers. And Echinopsis. She's got a great collection. Beautiful photo. Echeveria flower. I can never get them to come out like Echeveria flower pictures. Beautiful Echinopsis.
Cute.
And I guess that's a Gymnoclesium. And this is Phyllis de Crescenzo Is that a Libivia? I'm not sure. Gary, what do you think? Oops, sorry.
I
Oh,
think
dear.
so.
Let's go back. Yeah.
I think
Flowers
so.
sort of look like one. What do you think this is?
Neoportera.
Okay, thanks. Sulca rubudia, maybe?
No, Libivia arachnicantha.
Oh, wow.
It
Been
oddly,
stressed a little.
yeah, oddly enough, I've seen ones that are yellow flowers, orange flowers like this one, and magenta or purple flowers.
Hmm.
It's really a wide range of colors on that species.
Arachnicantha, interesting.
Yeah. I was going to do a post in the next day or two on Instagram because all of them have bloom, but always a day apart.
Well,
So I
when
can't
they're all
put them all in the same picture.
right. This is Flowering Dragon Fruit by Anita Kaplan. Oops. This is a Parodia by Bernard Johnson. And I guess an Echinopsis by Bernard. So thank you to all for sharing your gardens. Now, are you seeing the full?
Yes.
Okay, because I have a funny view and I just want to be sure you're seeing the full picture. Okay, we did not get any novice, so we're going into Kalanchoe Intermediate. And this is by Lamono Lot, a Kalanchoe fenchekwi, obviously in the ground, and a Kalanchoe orgialis by Lamono. I love these colors. This is a Syncephala dissecta by Anita Kaplan. And Kalanchoe Open, there were no intermediate cacti. It's the Fenchenkoe by Phyllis. And a Fenchenkoe variegated. I have a lot of these if anybody wants any. Hank used to sell them a lot. This is Kalanchoe linearifolia and the flower of linearifolia by Laura Woodley. Lucii by Phyllis de Crescenzo. Tubiflora. Okay, come on. There we go. Tomentosa by Phyllis and a Tomentosa by me. And the Tomentosa flower by Laura Woodley. Orangery, which is a cross of Jungmansi and Mangini. Let's go back. By Laurel. I love these flowers. They're really pretty. Kalanchoe arborescens by our Kalanchoe specialist, Laurel. Beharensis by Phyllis. I love the variety. Blossfeldiana by Laurel. And a close-up of the flower of Blossfeldiana. Citrina by Laurel. Gee, I wonder why they call it that. Grandiflora by Laurel. And Hildebranthie by Laurel. Laxiflora, I love the plant and the flowers side by side. That's great. Longiflora variety coccinea by Laura Woodley. And Marmorata by Laurel. Another Marmorata, but this is the flower. Or flowers, very prolific. Petitiana by Laurel. And a Pumala in flower by Laurel. This is my Rambo pilosa. I love this one. It's just one of my favorites. Robusta by Laurel. Streptantha by Laurel. Syncephala by Laurel. Uniflora, again Laurel. And now for the cacti, Disca cactus and Ubomania. I think I misspelled that. Disca cactus centenari by Phyllis. Those great spines. This is a disco cactus species about to flower. And this is a different one that's flowering. Ubomania pectinifera by Laurel and Ubomania pectinifera by Laurel. And I believe that is it. Bye. Sunsets. And another great presentation. Thank you all for your contributions. I would like to go to announcements. The first thing I'd like to announce is I still have not had any volunteers for replacing our secretary, Sue Wong. And we do need to continue to have minutes of our meeting. In addition, we are looking for someone to arrange for speakers or presenters for our meeting. So please consider volunteering for one of these positions and let me know if you're available. Gary, do you want to announce the October or do you want me to?
I can. Seeing as we're still doing Zoom, we're enabled to have people out of state. And I know a lot of people like to grow things from seed. And so we're going to get somebody who lives in Colorado, who's also on the CSSA board by the name of Rod Haney. He's vice president of the CSSA at the moment. But he has a lot of experience growing both cacti, including tephro-cactus, as well as a lot of mesons and other succulents. So he grows things from seed because there aren't that many nurseries where he lives. So he had to kind of redo that. So I think it's a topic that a lot of people will enjoy, and every seed grower that I know has a slightly different process. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say.
Great, thanks. Thanks for getting him. I think that's one of the advantages of Zoom that we can, while we're still doing Zoom, can take advantage of. The CSSA webinars continue to be available every other Saturday at 10 a.m. And our next presentation is September 18th and is one of our favorites, Ernesto Sandoval, who will talk on feeding succulents, how fertilizer, water, pH, and soil can and should be adjusted. And all these presentations are usually available on YouTube, which can be accessed through a link at the CSSA website or on its Facebook page. Our presentations and meetings up to this point will be also are being recorded and will be available on our Facebook page, and on the link will be on the website as soon as Scott gives that to Mike. So Mike, for the reports, would you please stop recording? I'm sorry, Scott.